Well, hello and welcome to the funding dilemma. My name is Paul Gurney, and I'm really excited to be moderating this very special panel. We've got a tremendous group of people here today to help us explore one of the most crucial areas of this whole topic, which is how do you take a bold, exciting new idea and move it to reality? And it's kind of the Jerry Maguire moment, right, of show me the money. So let me start by introducing our panel, and then we'll jump right into the questions. On your far right is Steve Jurvetson, and Steve is known for being first. He was the first investor in Hotmail, and I remember jealously seeing a video of him driving the very first Tesla Model S off the lot. He's got serial number 1, and so test drives after today. He's Elon Musk's go-to guy. So when Elon Musk was in the depths, the darkest moments at SpaceX, Steve is the person that he looked to. There's a bit of a limit to Steve's risk-taking. It doesn't sound like he's going to be number 1 on the flight, the first civilian flight, but maybe number 2. Yeah. He sits on the board of Craig Venter's Synthetic Genomics and works closely with lots of companies looking at biological applications for everything from bioconversion of waste feedstocks into specialty chemicals. And I love this one, humanization of pig organs for cross-species organ transplant, which they affectionately call the Sarah Palin Project, putting lipstick on a pig. So welcome, Steve. Lindy Fishburne is the executive director at Breakout Labs, which is part of the Thiel Foundation, and they're trying to prove that a non-profit venture capital organization is not an oxymoron. They champion technologies that have the potential to really change the world, and they cultivate and support really radical science companies at the very earliest stages. And Lindy's been on both sides of the table. She's managed several successful startup companies, and she knows the importance of a good story. She's married to a novelist. So welcome, Lindy. And then I think many of you already know Beth's story from the previous session. She's led many large and small companies, now works at Kleiner Perkins. And she develops companies to, that are also looking at breakthrough technologies to really improve human health. I think what has come through strongly for me is her drive and passion to take care of patients. It permeates everything that she does. One of the questions I asked her last week was, if you had any superpower, what would you choose? And she thought about it and finally responded. She said, I think if, most people say, I want to fly, I want to stop time, I want to, make a lot of money. She says, if I could really choose, I would have X-ray vision to help diagnose disease more rapidly, which I think really resonated given the talk that Jorge just gave. So welcome, Beth. Thank you all for being here. My own preferred superpower, I think, would probably be to predict the future. And our panel spends a lot of their time and a lot of their days trying to understand and predict what will happen in the future. So the first question I would love for each of you to kind of opine on is, what are some of the areas within bio that you're most excited about and think offer the most potential kind of 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And I may start with you, Lindy.
Okay, great.
Cold call.
So at Breakout Labs, we focus across advanced technologies. So we can actually fund quite a broad range of initiatives. And we like places where you've got disciplines banging into each other that haven't touched before necessarily. We have a company that is actually using technology that was written about in the 1950s, but we didn't actually have the facility to implement the idea, and so they're actually looking at an entirely new way to freeze and rewarm organs. So if you think about organ transplant today, we are at a bucket of ice running through an airport, right, and hoping there's not a rainstorm that holds up the plane. We haven't done much. And as we talk about being able to actually grow and build organs, we don't have any way to bank them if we're able to grow and build them. So they're looking at an entirely new way to freeze without using tons of cryoprotectant, and they'd be able to rewarm and restore biologic availability for an organ, which would completely eliminate organ waiting list, and allow us to bank the organs that we're focused on growing.
And will that ever help unfreeze Ted Williams?
I think we only have his brain, right? I don't think we have his whole body.
So we can't recreate the swing.
We have a whole nother, one of our company that's here at 3Scan, their ultimate goal would be whole brain emulation. So there's an option out there for Ted down the road, if he's not pickled fully yet.
Excellent. Steve, how about you?
Sure. So at DFJ, we have not traditionally invested in life sciences the way Beth has, so will be an interesting counterpoint. We try to do everything outside of human health. And we've been really inspired by the power of biological systems, not just directly, but metaphorically as well. So how we build complex systems in general, I think, is being infused and informed by what we're learning from the information systems of biology, their incredible power, robustness, and resilience. You heard some of that from Lindy, these bizarre combinations of the computer world and the biological world. And we're investing mainly in that, re-engineering microbes to make specialty chemicals, edible oils, specialty proteins, vaccines, eventually things that will affect human health. But in the near term, we're trying to stay away from that regulatory world. So that's kind of what we have been doing. It's brought us into ag bio. It's brought us into sectors we may not have otherwise have invested in. But metaphorically, what I'm excited about for the next sort of 10 to 20 years is how it changes the way we build, how we engineer artifacts that exceed human understanding. So in many cases in biology, this has been the problem they've dealt with for eons, which is we don't know how systems biology works in the human body. So we do studies, we do tests, we have ways to mitigate risk. Yet at the microbial side, you have people who are literally re-engineering life forms from scratch. You'll soon see results of the first completely artificial life form. Unlike any species on Earth, a living organism that reproduces, but was created from chemicals. In other words, the code, at least, was entirely fabricated without any animals involved. And this will start to challenge people's thinking that we have this great power to re-engineer life, yet we don't know quite what to do. How do we build larger, more complex systems than single-cell organisms, moving on to plants and mammals and eventually Sarah Palin projects? And I think what that'll expose is that our traditional engineering models break down, that we need to look to biology itself for inspiration. And in the fields of machine learning and deep learning, that's where it is exposed. It's just the technique that underlies just about everything Google's doing in their labs, everything that we're doing within the companies we're seeing in synthetic biology, and frankly, in almost every interesting computer science project out there, from, you name it, autopilot systems to eventually AI. They're going to be doing something that looks a lot more like the iterative algorithms of evolution and training a neural network than they will traditional programming models. And that, to me, is almost like the grand unification of the information systems of biology with information science in general. So a bit of a metaphorical answer, but I think it's going to be a brave new world, and it is mind-blowing when you see what's coming down the pipe.
Absolutely. And Beth, you talked a little bit about immune therapies and how you're excited about that. Do you want to expand a little bit on that, or are there any other areas that you're especially excited about?
Yeah, that's definitely an area of interest, and some of it was touched on today, so why don't I focus on two key areas that are affecting the biggest population that we're going to have to deal with, which are the baby boomers. And if we think about 80 million people, there are about 52 million today who are in that category, and probably 3-4 biggest things that are affecting that age group are cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes. So we can talk about cancer. There's no question in my mind the biggest breakthrough that I've seen in now decades of doing research in cancer is harnessing our own immune system, whether it's through a small molecule therapeutic that basically triggers the right type of T cell to attack the cancer cells, or keep the cells that regulate and actually allow those cancer cells to proliferate, to keep them in check. Very dramatic results are coming to fore for a set of cancers. That's going to continue to get more and more interesting. And the Alzheimer's side, we are in dire need for something that's going to help aging and health of the human brain. I know it's the right place to be when Art Levinson decides that he's not retired and Google funds him for this company called Calico, and I chatted with him very recently and said, so come on, like we're not going to stop the aging process. Of course, we're not yet, although at some point we may be able to if we want to, so be careful what we wish for. But we can address diseases like Alzheimer's and cancer. A brief story about Alzheimer's that's really interesting. You heard I mentioned and Alex mentioned induced pluripotent stem cells, so reprogramming of cells. A major discovery was made using that platform and work that we did in a company called Hyperion that was recently purchased by Bristol Myers Squibb, where we discovered a unique form of a protein that was expressed and we only could have found this based on the IPS technology that we believe will be applicable for Alzheimer's disease and a couple of other neurodegenerative diseases. And that will be going into the clinic this year. So within 8 years of discovery of a breakthrough massive technology, that's a very fast cycle, if you think about it. And I hope that we're going to see more of those types of technologies applied quickly. Takes a lot of guts and sort of, for leaning forward. Thank God there are people like us around that still are willing to do that, to see those advances happen so rapidly.
That's great. So you talk about leaning forward, and I think that the billion-dollar question that we'd love to kind of explore together is how each of you draw that line between what is a really cool technology and what is a fundable technology in this space. I'll let anybody jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. We probably fund the earliest. So we focus on going from the lab and out to that first stage of commercialization. And there's always, as we're looking at proposals and we're looking at companies and meeting entrepreneurs, we're trying to walk that line of, is it still a research project or is it actually ready to make that jump out? And we're looking at the strength of the entrepreneur and their experience and why they think that it's time, and also what those initial milestones are and the need in the market, right? So what aspect of that do they think they can commercialize? And a lot of the things that we're engaged in, it will take a long time to get to the full benefit. So we're also looking at their ability to fund intermediate steps along the way to the big vision, right? So we have a number of companies that ultimately you'd like to see in the clinic, but they may have a research application first. And so we're excited because that research application can help fund the path to the clinic, and being able to balance that short and long term is a key part of it. And I'm sure we haven't guessed, I'm sure as much as we're trying to walk that line, we will ultimately have funded things that turn out to be research projects. And hopefully, we're starting to see 2 years in a number of our companies raising Series A's. So they weren't research projects. They're ready to show substantial steps to commercialization.
Yep, they're starting to prove that the model is working.
Exactly.
Steve, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with what she said, and I think part of the premise of the question is that much of the venture community has a hard time with basic science. The term science project is a euphemism for next in many venture halls, and it's unfortunate, right? They'd rather fund on average the next social network, crack cocaine type experience of immediate feedback and making the world safe for ad matching. But the big heavy projects tend to get unfunded. So I do lament for the overall status. We at DFJ also try to pride ourselves on looking for those disruptive technologies, not just a science project, but something that is ready for commercialization. Within a 3 to 5 year time frame, I'm occasionally a little ahead of myself, and quantum computing was probably 10 years too early when we first invested in that. But generally, we try to look for things that are ready to go, perhaps a step or so after what she referred to. What we generally hold, though, is a similar filter, I think, is what I heard Lindy mention, which is we'd like to see that big, bold vision that change the world perspective out on the horizon, 10 years out, 20 years out, maybe even 50 years out to fully realize the vision. But in a way that chains back to the present, in a way that iterates with customers in a pragmatic way from day one. So it doesn't wait for other companies to ship product before you're viable. It doesn't wait for laws to change or the environment to shift. It is a remarkably difficult proposition for most entrepreneurs to both have a near-term pragmatic path to a customer engagement that is directly on path to something that will change the world. It is a bit of an enigma in a number of cases. But if you think of Elon Musk and colonizing Mars as a goal, that should inspire you that it can be done, right? If he can get that funded, then so can you, right? And I say that with the utmost respect. We sometimes will look to a future, let's say 500 years out, and everyone chuckles, especially people in government, whenever you say something like this, because they can't think even 5 years out or 5 quarters out. If there are certain things you believe in your heart are in inevitable trajectories, like for Elon, all vehicles will be electric. It is just so obvious. We will no longer debate the point 10, 20 years from now, but when he started, everyone debated it. It's inevitable. It's just a question of when and how. Or that we should become a multiplanetary species. Or that robots will do all work eventually that humans don't want to do. Which one? Life extension. Well, yeah, that could be a debatable point. Is it inevitable? And if so, do you want it? To what extent and for whom? And yeah, I mean, extending it for sure. Unlimited life extension, very interesting question. But certainly doubling lifespan, no question, right? I mean, can you imagine a world 500 years from now where human evolution just ended? You know, we stopped. You know, we didn't push forward in cultural or mimetic or technological evolution. We didn't do human germline engineering, which already is happening, you know, in certain places around the world off the radar screen. I've seen a number of cloned dogs and played with them from Korea. It's not that, you know, unthinkable that it's already underway.
Did they fetch and do?
Oh, they're adorable. Yeah, they're all from this mother Missy, so they're called near Missies. Yeah. Anyway, that's a digression. But trust me, you can read Beyond, or was it Beyond Humans? Gregory Stock's book on this. I find it compelling that it will come out of China first. So, if you think about those futures and then chain back to the present, you can imagine investments that start to make sense in that direction around a future of global connectedness, around, you know, internet devices for the next 3 billion. These are going to be some major trends that impact both the global economy and the business milieu. And then that's generally how I find entrepreneurs can then pitch, well, I've got a business that makes sense today, but if this near science fiction sounding reality plays out, it's going to make all the more sense. But if it doesn't, it's still a good business. So that's how we try to bridge that gap.
Beth, how about at Kleiner Perkins? How do you draw that line?
Okay, so let me bridge the Lindy and Steve, or try to. So let's see, we, probably the best way for me to articulate it is we look for things that are on the leading edge, not bleeding edge. And having spent a lot of time in operating rooms, anybody that understands, you know, you gotta be careful. We think in where you choose, and there are a lot of examples that, you know, many of us can talk about. We're just a little too early.
There's a reason they call it hemorrhaging cash, right?
Hemorrhaging cash, that's right. If you're on the bleeding edge, you have that risk for sure. So you're trying to find that you know, that line between, you know, what is really breakthrough. I have to say, as a venture capitalist, I am somewhat frustrated by a number of my colleagues, not the two up here, but they probably can relate to this, where, you know, I have to stop and say to them, it is venture capital, right? There is risk, and we are paid to take risk. And if we don't fund things that are risky, then who will? I mean, thank God we have Lindy and Peter and others who are filling the gap, but, you know, venture capitalists need to be bold enough to take some risk. And at least some of us are trying to do this, and doing well, actually, beating all the statistics on our returns. And some of that is the other component that Steve mentioned, I think very clearly, is there's got to be a market. There's got to be a need for something. You know, there are a lot of cool ideas or things that you say, I believe I can do this, but there's no proof. Or I believe if I do this, there will be interest, but there really isn't. And there doesn't have to be an established market, but there has to be, you know, in medicine and kind of the way I've been trained to think about it, a real unmet need, you know, that we can fill the gap. One of the things that it was not the topic for today, but that an area that we're incredibly bullish about is digital health. And the reason being, there's so much low-hanging fruit, it is ridiculous. There's just, now, not all of these companies are going to be huge, there are going to be some incremental companies, but we have to digitize healthcare in the same way that we're digitizing biology and everything else in our lives. We've got to do that quickly in the United States in order to be competitive and, quite frankly, be able to address what consumers want. Consumers, the fellow, sorry, I can't remember your name, for UC Santa Cruz. I mean, people will have zero tolerance for, well, why can't I have my information? And why can't I text my doctor or whatever? So a lot of low-hanging fruit there.
I've often heard people say that we're about 15 years behind in healthcare versus the consumer world. And so that means, you know, we're kind of in 1999, which is we're almost there in healthcare.
Yeah, but so the reality is that's true, but we didn't have the technology that we have today. I mean, you really needed mobile technology. Medicine and healthcare is distributed. It's not a fixed, and it will become more distributed. And mobile's huge. We needed the computing power for a lot of this information. cloud capability with storage. I mean, all of this is enabling much more rapid progress. If we're sitting on a stage 5 years from now and we're talking about, there's still a big gap, shame on us. I mean, all you guys, whoever's in the audience thinking about stuff, keep thinking, make sure we fund you. It's important.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about some specific pitches or presentations that you've seen recently that really wowed you. I mean, what does it take to cause a spark in you and make you say, aha? Would love to hear some stories about, an exciting moment in one of those pitches and what the entrepreneurs, what the innovators did to kind of bring that home.
Yeah, so ideally things we haven't invested in, so we're not just plugging for another one of our existing investments. Yeah. Well, I can throw out a couple that every week I'm just blown away. I mean, so the meta point is, oh my gosh, I've seen more innovation just qualitatively than ever before, and that generally is true every year. It just keeps accelerating. The ones of late that I've loved are when I asked someone, when did this first become simulatable? And there was one recently, a particularly esoteric domain on microwave circuitry, and it was just 2 years ago, and like the light bulb goes off. It's like, aha, now maybe it's moving from a trial and error experimentation science to a simulation science. This might be that pivotal moment where a given field will be revolutionized. So I try to look for those kind of why now answers to questions. Why could no one have thought of this or executed on this idea 5 or 10 years ago? And that's why I focus more on process innovation kinds of things, the capability to innovate around, let's say, machine learning versus any one artifact of innovation. But lately, I've just been blown away by people working, which we have not invested in synthetic meat. That also seems like an inevitability. We won't kill animals to get.
Which we have invested in.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And Caufield Ventures, I think it's 5 synthetic meat investments.
Yeah.
We have 0, so I'm giving them kudos. To me, it's one of those inevitabilities. We'll look back at our present selves and condemn our own moral behavior when we can get good bacon and steak without killing things. And then we'll actually look in slaughterhouses, which we won't want to look in today. So there are other things where, when George Church just keeps coming up with amazing stuff. So anything he does just blows you away. And even though he didn't pitch me in the last week, when I hear about companies that he's involved with, just about everything. Like, hey, let's introduce a few more Neanderthal genes back into the human gene pool. That's an interesting one more recently that he's come up with. You're going to hear about Revive and Restore later, but I'll save that one for Ryan and Stuart, which is a mind bender in its own right. It's just, every day an entrepreneur who's thinking and imbued in this technology domain could probably knock the socks off just about anyone you meet in a bar or in colloquial conversation. If they could just translate the vernacular to something everyone can understand, they're like, people would, their jaws dropped. Like, what, you are doing what? Like, that's actually happening? So, I mean, I don't know if people in the room realize that you're sitting on a can of miracles and no one seems to know about it.
Yeah, so I have the same response, and in terms of just unbelievably blown away by what we see entrepreneurs bringing in. And I think that the telltale sign of the success and dedication and jaw dropping has lately been, I guess we're quantifying the amount of our entrepreneurs, CEOs' own blood and bodies that are being used for things. So they're coming in already having demonstrated their product as much as possible on themselves, on their family members, on whoever else was able to participate. So one of the companies that we just funded has had multiple family members and themselves sitting in a chair for 3 hours drinking milkshakes and hamburgers to test this new EKG for the gut. And so we're finding all kinds.
I'd sign up for that one.
Yeah, exactly. Sounded like a good trial.
And you lose weight at the same time.
Yeah, so we're seeing the extremes to which entrepreneurs will go to demonstrate the potential viability of what they're working on and how excited they are about taking it out of the lab. And it's pretty compelling. At times disturbing, but pretty compelling.
Wow. So those are the things that kind of get you excited. I'd be curious about the flip side also of what are the big barriers, especially within bio, that keep you up at night, make you worried, make you a little bit more skeptical than you would be evaluating, a new matchmaking application or
I mean, for me, particularly on the biotech side, whenever we're taking something from an academic lab, so no offense to the academics in the audience, but there's a lot of literature now that shows that many of the experiments cannot be reproduced and translated in an industrial setting. So Every time I do that, and I still do look for technology out of an academic lab, I lose some sleep until we can reproduce the experiments. We always back ourselves up with multiple different options and know that we can work around, so we don't rely solely on a single point or a single discovery. You know, the other area that's always important for all of us as venture capitalists is the leadership and the people. And serial entrepreneurs that have been successful and shown that they have the aptitude and interest in being an entrepreneur, those are easy and they don't keep us up. But the ones who, you know, are first time and transitioning from different roles, it's not for everybody. And until you spend some time with the entrepreneur and you see that they transition, it's a little bit of, for somebody like me who's been an operator, I want to help a little too much, and so it's like I have to hold myself back.
I think it's the proposals that we get in the companies we talk with, that it's this very small company, maybe, you know, an academic coming out of university, and they say, you know, we're going to take on cancer, and we'll be successful if we take, you know, 1% of this $1 billion market. And we say, that's never successful. You know, I'd really rather know that you're really going to solve this very specific problem in a much smaller market, and you're going to own that entire market. And then I know that you actually know what your need is, who your customer is. And if you're 1% of this huge market, you have no idea who your real customer is. And so we see a lot of those proposals where they're really excited about the technology, but there's no sense of where it's going to land. And that's the big red flag.
It's the 1% plus or minus 1% problem.
Right.
Exactly.
That's a turnoff.
I guess I'd say, in the near term, sort of immediate, pragmatic, here and now worries is the capital intensity of some projects and the lack of financing for later stages. And that's, for most investors, a really dangerous time to hit a snag is after you've invested a bunch of money. And then, let's say for scale up or what have you, the expansion rounds aren't there. And the sector's had its up and downs, and whether you look at the biofuels category just disappearing, or things coming in and out of favor. We found increasingly a number of companies have to depend on corporate investment for those later rounds, and that can come with both benefits and risks. And so that's a near-term worry. A longer-term general worry, I think, as Beth mentioned, is there's a lot of surprises that can occur on the path to market, and things take longer than you expect, and that sort of robustness is something you can lose sleep at night about any given company at a given moment. And then long-term, in the long arc of history, I worry about the tech-accelerated rich-poor gap. And it might seem related, but I think it is. As more people come online and more businesses become information businesses, including the ones in the room today, they become a winner-take-all dynamic, and you'll have increased polarization of wealth, which could lead to decreased dissatisfaction if you don't have basic Maslow hierarchy needs provided for all people. So food, shelter, clothing, and if Maslow lived in the time of HMOs, I think healthcare would have been the next one on that bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think the access to education thing is being addressed with MOOCs. We need a MOOC for healthcare, right? Yeah. Someone who's going to make the information content of healthcare free for everyone forever. And I think that is a good business opportunity. And I would love to find an entrepreneur who wants to tackle that and is already tackling that, because it's like the big gaping hole that needs to be solved so that we can remove the motivation to do great harm with these technologies, right? As weapons of mass destruction enter the hands of individuals, it'd be great if we could remove the motivation to do such things.
Absolutely. So would love to hear from all of you and kind of see if you have any questions for our distinguished panel. Looks like we've got one right there.
My name is Natalie, and I'm a founder of a nonprofit organization at Zilla. My question is mainly for Lindy, but it touches on what Beth said, and Steve might add to that as well too. One of the biggest issues, and you all mentioned that, is the issue that most of the VCs, as we know, or later stage investors, shy away from taking risks, right? And social entrepreneurs, not just in US, but all over the world, has this issue. What is interesting to me is that I don't see much of a collaboration between foundations that are recently getting more and more involved in, either through mission-related investment or patient capital or whatever, investing in these social entrepreneurs with the VCs. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the problem is because, in my opinion, the foundations are pushing at the stage that the entrepreneurs are ready to come out of the incubation with the foundations, they're more pushing them to our VCs than the other way around. So this is what my question is. My question is, do you think that we will come to a point to address this major issue as far as the innovation in general is concerned, seeing more of the VCs actually bringing interesting and very promising projects that are early stage to foundations, because then they have an exit strategy, than the other way around. And if somebody would facilitate something like that, would you all be interested in partaking in that kind of a practice, that VCs will bring more of the interesting and promising projects to the foundations that do the early stage funding, knowing that later on, when they're actually leaving the incubation of the foundations, the VCs will have, let's say, the first right of investment in that particular project?
So it's an interesting question, and we've been dealing a lot with how to actually help and potentially push foundations to actually engage with companies more. It's not what most foundations are set up and comfortable doing, right? They're typically arranged and organized, and their legals very comfortable with funding nonprofits. They're not very comfortable funding companies. I think where you see the most advance, and to some degree that model you were talking about, is the disease foundations. So the disease foundations that have been successful pulling together their funding and also their patient populations are now presenting themselves as a real resource for VCs that are looking at a particular company or particular indication. They can pull their patient group together and accelerate a clinical trial in a dramatic way that saves money and increases that velocity to market. So I think that we actually have a somewhat healthy ecosystem building between disease foundations and the funders that want to pick up those programs that are coming out of the foundations afterwards. I think outside of specific diseases and across advanced technologies, for example, when it's not something that you have a strong advocacy group around, we don't have a healthy structure built around that right now. And so there's actually, and I'm happy to follow up with you, there's a number of people that are getting together to talk about how foundations can actually engage more directly with companies, even outside of program-related investments.
Should we do one more question? One more question?
Bassam Fahmawi, Maui DNA Technologies. One of the things, of course, you being venture capitalists, you're exposed to a lot of proposals. And one of the things that is interesting to hear from you, are you seeing the number of quality going up year over year of innovation and caliber of entrepreneurs, or you're seeing, a decline or basically status quo? If you can speak to that.
I imagine we're all seeing an increase. It's
an increase in quality or an increase in volume?
Well, it's both. The quality continues to go up as we make progress in the biological, engineering, and computer sciences. There's no question that progress is there in quality, and entrepreneurs are coming in. We're seeing some very good ideas because there seems to be less fear or fewer boundaries to stay in your area of focus or your area of training, and willingness to take that and move it over or port it to another area of interest. And some of the best ideas that we're seeing are from what you would consider non-traditional entrepreneurs, technology folks who are working in healthcare or biologists who are going into technology. And to me, that's been just an interesting observation that we've seen more and more happening probably over the past short term, like 3 years, not 5 or 10. That's been our observation.
Would you guys agree?
Similar.
Yeah, I think if a premise of accelerating change, you would be or be inconsistent if the amount of innovation isn't compounding. And I think sometimes from investors you'll get a referendum on how they're feeling about their portfolio, which is a backward-looking measure, and how enthusiastic they're feeling in the moment, which is kind of bizarre. And when you look at the things we've seen this week, if I were to try to give you a quality judgment, well, I may be wrong, right? I mean, I invest in a tiny fraction of what I see, and I don't follow up, and I don't know who failed and who succeeded, but most fail. And so The quality metric's harder, so if I used a proxy like how many ideas are unlike anything I've ever seen before, that to me is a good innovation metric, and that seems to keep compounding and diversifying. So I started in this industry in '95, and it was all software, healthcare, and semiconductors. That was pretty much it. And then datacom and telecom and the internet happened. But today it's agriculture, rockets, cars, drones, robots, AI. I mean, it is a set of industries I never would have imagined would even be on the plates or the radar screen of any venture capital investor, because there was no historical precedent for being in these industrial industries of energy, and like, it's just bizarre. $1 trillion industries, global industries. When I started, we just looked at US businesses selling to US customers. It is so different today, just 19 years later, which is like an eternity, that if I step back and look at the arc, it feels like exponential progress in the pace of innovation.
Well, that's an exciting and encouraging note to end on, I think. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Lindy. Beth, thanks so much. Paul. Actually,